Welcome to the What is Smart podcast. We dive deep into the ever-evolving world of intelligence, learning, and success. Join us as we engage with leading educators, psychologists, technologists, and thinkers, unraveling insights and challenging old notions. From EQ to creativity, from tech savviness to social awareness, What is Smart is your guide to understanding intelligence in the 21st century. Let's change education together. What's going on, everybody? It's July. I'm here in the lab, as you can see, with the vans, with the people with the microphones and earphones in there, and we're doing the work, guys. We're in the lab doing the work to change the way education looks and feels for learners on the ground. We can't do that without your help. I need you. If you are listening, if you are watching, if you're like, Garrett, I love your stuff, I need you to go to www.thegardensfoundation.org and I need you to donate. We can't do this without money, guys. We, of course, are working on grants and donations and private donors, but your donations help. Trust me. All proceeds go to our current projects with Johns Hopkins as well as Texas Tech. And you can buy merch. What is Smart merch? Take it to parties. People are like, what is smart? Boom, that's your in for a really cool conversation because it's a subjective answer every time. And I absolutely love that. Today, we have an amazing guest. Her name is Charle Peck. She's a social worker, educator, mental health, and how important that is for the future of learning. Can't wait to share Charle with you. We'll see you soon. All right, everybody. Welcome to What is Smart, where we explore groundbreaking ideas in education and mental health. Today, we're honored to have Charle Peck with us. Charle is the co-creator of Thriving School Community, a revolutionary program designed to improve mental health in schools. With over 20 years of experience in education and mental health leadership, Charle brings a unique perspective as both a certified teacher and a licensed clinical therapist. Very cool, specializing in trauma. She holds a master's in education and a master's in social work, and her dual roles as a high school teacher, so cool, and crisis therapist provide her with deep insights into addressing youth mental health issues in our schools. Charle is also the co-author of Improving School Mental Health, the Thriving School Community Solution, and a global keynote speaker. Join us as we delve into Charle's innovative solutions for fostering mental well-being in schools. Welcome, Charle, to the podcast.
Well, hello. I am absolutely thrilled to be here, Garrett. Thank you.
No, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you. I think you provide a very interesting perspective when it comes to what we think about every day, which is the future of learning. You know, mental health being such an important subject, especially post-pandemic. I think the work that you're doing in blending both the perspectives really and mindset of an educator and a social worker working in trauma, it's meeting a deep need currently. So I'm fascinated. We always like to start off the show with an origin story, the X-Men #1 of why Charle got into education, and then of course why you're doing the work you're doing currently. So let's start with a abbreviated version, but don't get too abbreviated with us.
Okay. Well, yeah, because there's always a history for everybody, isn't there? Everybody has a story. But I will say, Garrett, that I always knew I'd work with teens somehow, kids and teens. I got a background in child development, individual and family development, and I just knew that the adolescent group, they were underserved and misunderstood. And so I always had a heart for that, but I had no direction when I was younger. I really didn't know until I started coaching volleyball for a high school. And then I thought, well, that's it. I'm going to be a teacher and work with them full time. So
Very cool.
what's interesting is I was elementary starting out, and I did work with young kids, like in early learning at 1.2. But what's interesting is I spent 18 years in the high school classroom. I got to teach about mental health and development to teenagers. I got to teach them about how their own brain worked and how their childhood affected them even today and how it will affect their relationships in the future and their growth and transition into being an adult. And so I loved the curriculum. We got to talk about social challenges, what was going on in the world affecting them, and how it's going to impact the change that we need to see in our society. So all of that is what I got to spend 20 years doing professionally. And so when I was doing that, Garrett, oh my goodness, so many of my students came to me saying, I am struggling. There's just so much we're struggling with. So when we talked about anxiety and depression,
Mm.
mental illness, that all came out. We talked a lot about suicide, and they need to talk about it, and they don't know how to talk about it. And schools are terrified to talk about it. So I teamed up with the social workers in our school. And I realized that if I was going to do a better job leading this and really understand what was going on with these kids and how to help them, I knew that I needed a structural perspective. I needed to understand it better. And so that's why I went and got a Master of Social Work degree, which helped me understand all the generational historical issues going on with individuals and families today. So that's why I did that. And that led me to clinical social work, working in residential treatment, working in a hospital setting in crisis. And I am working on getting back into the school, even just, a day or two a week, just to help kids that way too. So yeah, that's the abbreviated version.
Yeah, no, and super helpful for our viewers and listeners to understand the context of like, why you do what you do. I think education as well as, social work is a calling, right? Like none of these careers are ones that you're like, I'm making bank being a social worker or an educator. Um, but I do think that obviously, in speaking with you prior to the show, one of the things we've seen in our research is how important a strong foundation of mental, what we think of as fitness, is for the future. And one of those things has always been this stigma around not talking about mental health. You said something about suicide earlier. I think the reason we see an incline, or partly a reason that we see an incline in behaviors like that and actions like that, which are just so drastic and dictate how drastic the problem is. I think part of that problem has to do with the fact that it's a subject we as adults even don't know how to really pose correctly. And so I do see that value of, having these discussions early, embedding mental health within school systems. Talk to us a little bit about what you've learned in your experiences of being a social worker in that environment, and how you think we can start that scaffolding of mental fitness, of taking care of your mental health just as you do your physical health.
Yeah, that's a great question because I've learned so much, so much. But it really comes back to this. One of the things that I knew was missing is that we are lacking skills as educators and really adults surrounding our kids. I mean, I'm a parent of three boys too, and boy, has that been really tough. I mean, wow. So it comes back to function. I always speak in terms of function. How are we doing functionally? Like, are we showing up the way that we need to? Are we energized? Are we feeling like we want to be where we are? And so if not, what is the hiccup? What's the barrier? Sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's very deep and complex. And so each of us are individuals just coming to play the game, right? And trying to just live life and find some darn joy in life. And that's what I
That's
always kind
right.
of envision, right? And so I think developmentally, I think about adults surrounding our kids. How are they doing? What's going on in their lives that's preventing them from truly finding that joy and functioning at their best? And really, what's happened is I found out that they're lacking skills, like many kids are when they're misbehaving. Adults are lacking skills that make them feel confident in appropriately managing their own mental health and wellness needs, but also responding to those challenging behaviors that kids give us that make us super uncomfortable. And when we don't know what to do, we often resort to things that weren't working in the first place. And we get overwhelmed. And so that's why we're stepping out. So the simple answer that I have been thinking about for years, for like so long, and I don't mean the number 4 years, I mean probably for over a decade now, is how do we equip teachers? Because they're the ones spending so much time with our kids, and our kids actually come to them with a lot of issues rather than a school social worker or school counselor, not because they aren't equipped to respond, but they're not developing all of the relationships that kids are when they're spending so much time with the teacher. And
I was
so,
just going to say,
yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say
Yeah,
that most teachers in classrooms are school counselors. You know what
yeah,
I mean? Like
yeah,
they are the ones establishing those close relationships. And I think, God, it's so good that you call that issue out, because I think that's one thing that we don't talk a lot about in classrooms, because I look at that aspect of classroom management, if you will, as some classroom management. You need to be present. You need to be an example for your learners in your classroom. But it's so hard to do that with a system that not only constantly is piling things up on learners, but is also piling things up on educators. And so you have this crunch on both sides of the coin, and only one of them is older with wisdom. So, how do we connect with educators in empowering them to what I think of as you were talking is, um, you know, being able to equal parts connect in a meaningful way, but also disconnect and have boundaries to not take a lot of talk about trauma, a lot of the trauma that we see in schools home.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we validate them. We
Mm,
absolutely. And that's one of the things leaders they try to do, but there is a disconnect sometimes. And so one of the things we get them to do is just say this one thing. What do you need to do your job better? Ask your staff, what do you need to do your job better? It validates them and it actually is a needs-based approach, which is very trauma-based. But aside from the trauma stuff, because some people don't like to use that word, it's misunderstood. But they really are attuning to them. And then they're what they ask for is usually very simple, but it's also not giving them a blanket resolve to something that they think they need. Is actually empowering them and having a voice, because a lot of teachers just don't feel like they have a voice. And the other thing is equip them, give them the tools they need to make their own function better, right? To feel like they're well every day. And when it does get overwhelming, excuse me, when it does get overwhelming, how do I manage that? Because it is so fast paced. How do I manage it when a student comes to me with a deep issue that I don't know what to do? I'm not their therapist and don't want to be their therapist. What do I do with that? They just need
mm.
the tools. We need some basic protocols. We need some communication in place, but really it comes back to equipping them. So here's how I came up with that. So, Garrett, I'm sitting here as a therapist, having 18 years in a classroom, and then I'm a therapist. And I'm sitting in these sessions with kids and teens and families. So there's adults there. And I'm thinking, why am I equipping these adults and these kids with tools and skills of reframing and just managing or shifting your thinking? Why are we not equipping teachers with this who work with kids all the time? And so that's why we came up with the book, right? That's why the skills are there to be integrated, but not to add to the workload. It's how do we integrate them simply? So that is the idea. That's how we're going to change, is knowing that the system isn't going to change quickly around us. We know this, but we can step into it a little differently. Now, you mentioned something, Garrett, about boundaries, and I speak in terms of limits. What we've got to do is start attuning with our own bodies and our own response to a situation and notice when we've actually reached a limit, and then not expect other people to respect that limit because they won't. And so when we have
Amen.
control over that, right, we now
Hmm.
feel empowered again.
Amen. It's having that mindset. It's metacognition, right? It's like taking a step back and saying, how am I showing up right now? Because with awareness comes change, right? And I think there are so many moments for educators across the country, and it's different locationally, right? Like you go to inner city Boston comparative to rural Louisiana, those needs of students are different. The issues and trauma at scale are different. But I think every child experiences, every person experiences trauma in their life in some sort of fashion. And, first of all, with your experience in early learning, you said a little bit, and then of course through elementary, what do you see as the key in beginning that? This is selfish for me because I'm in early learning,
Sure.
beginning that conversation with kids around their mental health. What I mean to them, what is mental health? You know what I mean? So,
Right.
what do you see as the best approach to that?
The best, easiest way with little kids is have them name their emotions.
Yep.
Have them familiar with that. And some adults give me some pushback on that, Garrett. Not everybody, but they're like, "Well, oh my gosh, I'm so sick of talking about feelings." Okay, then use a different word, but really we do need to get kids to identify what they're feeling so that they can communicate a need behind that. Because when they misbehave, that makes us uncomfortable. Let's think of it in terms
Right.
of that. It's because there's a need that they have to get, and their skills are vastly different than the adult skill. Like they have to build the skill. So if we can learn to settle ourselves down around them and just be a little bit more curious about what the need is, a little kid can, you can give them language, basic language. You can teach them sign language for milk, for crying out loud, when they're 8 months old. I mean, they can communicate. So teach them what that feeling is. And then as they grow older, what do you need? Are you
Well,
hungry,
and
tired?
I was gonna say if you get heady on it, most people's issues are rooted in control, and children are no different when it comes to their little lives and how out of control they are of those little lives. And so even an awareness of emotion, something that isn't necessarily understood at first, gives them a semblance of control through awareness. So again, like you called out for adults, the more you're aware, right, the more you have the ability for choice. And the more that you can change that path, and I always root it back to educators, it's like, yes, everybody, for lack of a better term, and we can cuss on this podcast, but has their shit, right? And if you come into the classroom and you're pouring that all over and you're displaying that, and then wondering why you have a classroom full of disengaged, angry learners, I think
Mhm.
the first thing we need to do is look in the mirror, right? And get right with ourselves. And that takes me to my next question, which is, we've seen a mass exodus in the education industry, right? And I feel it because I hire educators. You feel it because you're around educators all the time, and know what it's like to be in that position. Um, you know, how much of that do you think is mental health related, if not all? And do you see a path for those educators that got, done, uh, to come back to the industry? How do you think that would even happen?
Yeah, I'm absolutely hopeful for the future of education, actually. And I think they can absolutely step back in. We are shifting our thinking around this. I, it is very possible because they love kids and they want to help kids. So, um, to address that first, yes. So, what's happening is, again, I go back to function. It's because they're overwhelmed and they feel like
Yeah.
nobody's listening to them to meet their needs. And so when they're showing up to kids that, and they keep hearing that, it's all your fault. You change. When we keep saying that to teachers, which by the way, the power is within them. It is. But they keep hearing that, they keep thinking, well, you're not validating how I'm feeling. And by the way, you're not taking care of the behavior of this kid that keeps showing up in my classroom. So I feel unsupported, I feel undervalued, so I'm done. That's what's happening so frequently. But when we get them to shift, when we get them to think about the environment that they're setting up, and even if it's mid-year, what does your classroom look like? If you're a student, you walk into that space, what does that maybe feel like? Now, what if I'm a kid coming from this environment? It might be different, right? All those 30 different perspectives. So when we get them validated, which I've already said, but it's huge, and we get them to think of, how do I function in a way that I can still find joy in my life, still have some leisure time, feel like this job is not my only part of life that I'm going to just get. I just don't want that regret, right? And so a lot of people talk about that on social media. They're hearing those things. So that's kind of the key. So yes, I'm hopeful, and we let them know that they don't have to do everything all the time and be everything.
Yeah, and the freedom to release those shackles, because you watch so many first year educators just get thrown in. It's become this kind of like sorority slash fraternity thing where you have the seasoned educators like, watch this one tumble. You know, I think if we reframed the conversation, starting educators out with, hey, like, you need to have boundaries in this, and here's why, and story after story after story of educator that takes too much of it home. I think one of the things you'd called out is validation, right? Like, and multiple times, because it is so important. And I think it's really important to point out that in your classrooms with all of the learners that come in, you're not going to have to agree with all of your learners, especially adolescents, high school kids. Validation isn't necessarily agreement. It's more so respecting, in my opinion, someone else's perspective and at least trying to go, huh? So, my question to you is, how important do you think curiosity is to establishing an environment of overall mental fitness? And I say mental fitness as just a practice of focusing on mental health.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. Yeah, curiosity is the trauma lens. I mean, it takes a whole different approach rather than being punitive and reactive. It's like, I wonder what's going on here. I wonder what's happened to this kid or that adult, by the way, that I'm trying to lead and manage and serve. Why are they doing that? I wonder why. Um, and also, I wonder what they need because it's always about there's a need that's not getting met. And a lot of us just don't know how to get that need met, or we're so clouded with overwhelm and time constraints and things to do that we think that we can't meet that need. So there's some language we would use around that. There's some simple tools we would use around that. And let's go back to some of that overwhelm and choice. And we created this tool that's called the Path of Possibilities. And it can be
Mm,
used with young kids and adults. And if we keep it so simple, Garrett, in that midst of overwhelm, we can have clarity. We can get curious. Okay, let's think about what do I want? What don't I want? Or what do I need? What don't I need right now? And if they're in the midst of making a decision, or anybody is, we are, we can ask ourselves, is what my next move is what I plan to do next, is that going to lead me to what I want or what I don't want? And when we can stop and have that tool and visualize it or even say it out loud and go like this with little kids and just show them which road do you want to go down, it gives them that time to process it, even if it's really fast. So just so simple. It's just so simple. Curiosity is absolutely leading all of that.
I agree. And, as we have conversations with so many people across the world, that's one of the big through lines that comes up is, I think the best educators are the ones that are like, as Socrates said, the ones that are willing to say that they don't know anything at all, right? Like they're openly curious and explorative of the world. And I think it's just fundamentally important to establish that foundation first with educators to you can say hard things with kind candor is kind of what I was
Yes.
thinking in my head,
Yes.
and if you can show up as an educator with the intention, and intention and action are two very different things, but with the intention of being kind, period,
Yeah.
right? Like that could help shape a truly magical learning environment if you just gave it the consistent try, and that again leads me to my I'm great at segues. That leads me to my next question, which is, let's say, Charlie, that you have the ability, right, to go into a classroom and say, this is the current thing, throw it out. How would you, and let's just focus on the start of a day, right? We don't have to get into the whole day. How would you, in your classroom, start your day out so that we start encouraging this more um, relaxed, more calm, more peaceful mindset for learners in the classroom?
Yeah. There's so many things I actually did. I mean, there's so many things like getting together in a circle, which so many people do, that sense of community, check in and say, like, how you doing? What are you bringing in with you? Um, or just sometimes if you're short on time, you can just do a one word check in. Or if there's an issue that has come up, like at one point we lost a teacher, and let's talk
Mm,
about that. Let's sit around. Now you have to have some skills and things in place to talk about some of those hard things, but just just creating that sense of community is a big deal. And the other piece I would add to it is movement. We are so
mm.
structured in our day, and structure is important for kids, but we've got to incorporate movements. We do one of these things called rapid resets that I did all the time. It's kind of like a brain break, but it's very intentional and it's to change energy. So sometimes the energy in a classroom's very high and we need to lower that just even for our own sanity, right?
Pay
Um,
attention, educators. Pay attention. Continue.
Yeah, no, no, no. And there's one, and we'll do it right here because we're visual. But okay, if you put
I
your
love
thumb
it.
up, this is called the finger thumb switch. It's not clever, but it will work. And then you point at your thumb with your other finger, your pointer finger, and then all of a sudden you switch. Simultaneously, you switch your thumb and your finger. Yes.
Oh,
Right. And that's what happens, right? Okay. So then you do it again, and I'll do it really slow in case people are trying this because I really want you to try this in your own classroom. It doesn't matter the age of your kids. You can do this with adults too,
ooh,
right? Real slow. And when you get really good at it, Garrett, it looks like this even when you're talking. Now, this is about growth mindset. This is about rewiring
Carol Dweck,
your
baby.
brain. Yes.
Yep.
So rewire, you can rewire your brain. And think about that. If the energy is really low and we get in a whole classroom doing this, what happens? People are laughing. We've shifted out of the norm. We've engaged them, and we're creating trust and relationship that, listen, I know that you needed me to stop talking because I saw that you were not listening. And not because you're trying to be rude, but because I've either gone on too long, or it's just an energy shift, or it's 8 o'clock in the morning and your teenage brain hasn't woken up, or your little early learners, right? They just need to change. And so you'll notice that shift, that you can actually
Now,
control the energy in your room,
I
right?
love it.
Yeah,
I
and there's
love
so
it.
many. We have a top 10 list we give out. Yeah.
See, and that's why I love what you do because there's so many people that are out there, talking heady conversation, saying this is what we need, but not a lot of folks are giving granular tools in the classroom that work. And as you were giving me this tool, because I'm going to teach my teachers that, and I'm a drummer, right? Like and I can't like I can all of my limbs are independent. Still have a tough time with that. I'm gonna come back to you and be like boom, 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 boom. But a tool that I use just to share this and for our audience as well is, we talk a lot about mindfulness in our schools and being aware of self and being aware that you can take a step back from your own thinking, right? And a lot of kids ask, even at young ages, like what are you talking about? Like it's very confusing to them. And I always use this as an example. I go, I want you to say motors, and I'll do it to you, Charlie. I want you to say motorcycle.
Motorcycle,
Say it again.
motorcycle,
Say it one more time.
motorcycle.
Now say it in your head.
Okay.
Sound is defined by vibration that comes into your ear. Your brain then deciphers that vibration and interprets it as language. No one said motorcycle in your head, but you heard it, correct?
Yes.
That is you. That is your conscious. That to me has been such a powerful tool because it's super like in their head and makes them super aware that, there's something in us, whether it be a soul and energy, talk about energy of the classroom, it allows them and maybe even frees them a little bit to be more aware of that inner voice, if you will.
Love it. And I
Um,
love, Garrett, that you give space for little kids to do that, because that's the
oh
way they can
yeah.
acquire that. They can, can't they?
Oh my God. And even more so than adults. I was going to say, as you were talking a lot about emotional maturity and being aware of emotion and self, like the practices, because we're intentional about it in our schools, the practices we work with, yoga, mindfulness, the embedment of both of those things within curriculum, even and behavior management. Again, educators take note. Um, if children are kind of from the start given these practices and tools, it becomes routine. And talk about a tool belt, it becomes part of their executive functioning tool belt, which to
Yes.
me is such a powerful thing. Even that aha moment of no one said motorcycle out loud, yet I heard it in my head. Like that's enough for a child to really understand, oh my God, like I can control how I show up. I don't always have to be reactionary. And so, again, leading into my next question, anxiety. Anxiety has become, I just read The Anxious Generation. I don't know if you've read that book.
Great
It's a
book.
scary book, super scary,
Mhm.
because everything that we've been saying culturally and even in pop culture of like kids these days and X, Y, like the math, the research, the data is all tracking towards we are hurting children with things like social media through things like anxiety. So talk to us a little bit about that increase, right? One, of course, you've noticed it. And two, how do you think we attack that head on within our schools?
Well, first of all, kids need to talk about it. Kids want to talk about these things, and there's not a lot of space for them to do that. And so we need to have adults feel comfortable, give them the language, and let them know what they can say that will be effective. And a lot of, oh my gosh, I get this all the time. Should we have cell phones in schools? Well, okay, zero policy of anything doesn't historically work. Now, if
It's
you're in a
called
middle school,
prohibition.
yeah, that's
Doesn't
right.
work.
That's exactly right. But do I think that elementary kids and middle school kids need a cell phone in their hands in a school? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because if you talk to middle schoolers, that is where so much of their troubles come from, is because either, of course, attention. We know that's attention. If we ask them to put them in their pocket, they're going to sneak it, right? They're just going to do that. But also, there are so many kids that have told me that when you were teaching or when their teacher was teaching, that some kid was sending them terrible messages. And that's going on
Mm,
right in the space around us, and we have no idea. And some of
yep.
these kids go home and they're suicidal or they're self-harming, and that is happening right in front of us. So social media is doing that. It is. And we all know this too, that it's designed to be so addictive to our kids. It's just, it is not a great thing. And we don't have like a ton of historical data. We have enough
Nope.
now to know it's not great, but
Yep.
we don't know how it's going to change brains long term yet. So,
No.
and it keeps kids sitting down, it keeps kids looking down. One thing that is kind of interesting is that a couple of my kids, I have three kids, but a couple of them love books. I mean, they're glued to books like they would be a phone, even from when they were young. And so we let them use books because we're like, let them take them everywhere. But we realized it's doing the same darn thing to them that phones do. And it's just as bad. We had to regulate reading because their faces were down in a book, not looking up, engaging socially with other people. We're not teaching them the social skills that they absolutely need to connect to other people. So it's building
I was
isolation too.
I was just thinking in my head, be here now. Like it's so much more important for kids to be present in the world that they're actually in
Yeah.
than, creating this false sense of reality based on social media, video games, things like that. Again, I'm with you. I'm not demonizing any of these things, but what I do know is that, I was watching some video with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He's an actor, and he was saying we have drug regulations on things that are this addictive, less addictive. You have literal laws, regulating all of it, and zero regulation upon these algorithms that are held as top secret as anything the government has, which is crazy to me. It's I think the crazy part about it is the awareness of the problem, right? And the inaction. Even in Congress,
Mhm.
when they're trying to, nothing gets done with politics anymore. So it's this problem that just becomes more and more exponential. So that's why, going back to what you said, it's so important for educators to know that the power is within their classrooms. I'm a futurist when it comes to learning and an educator that's developed an innovative approach. And I think the reason why I value mental health so highly is because we're going into a day and age where, kids are going to have stuff in their contact lenses that we'll never even dream of, to where content-based education is going to be so irrelevant, right? And even more so important to root into what makes us human. And these are real conversations. That's the craziest part, is like, AI is not just coming, it's here.
Yeah.
And it's getting more and more, sophisticated and embedded in our everyday lives. So the way we combat that, in my opinion, is going back to teaching kids how to be human again. And I think if we can, and I saw that they're considering it in Virginia, where the podcast comes out of and where I'm from, a ban on school devices in schools. I'm for that reason, because I think, you know, we're taking away exponentially social skills using quote unquote social media.
Yeah. And I do struggle with that. I think elementary, yeah. I think middle school, yeah. I think that can fly. In high school, what I think about that is if you have a great relationship that's built in trust with your teacher, you have a group and you can rely on each other. I think it could allow space for good teaching around that, around
Hmm.
how to properly use the cell phone. If you lead it right, you can get some research and have them make decisions. And these kids usually tell you, oh, my kids will never have social media before they're 20 or whatever,
Right.
you know. So part of that I struggle with to ban it completely from all schools. I don't know the answer. I mean, I've thought about this a lot.
Yeah, me
So
too.
we could be great teachers in teaching them to adapt as well, because guess what? They have to adapt. That's what we do as humans. That's why we've survived over all this time. We adapt. And we can't remove stuff that is inherently in their environment to learn and grow with either. So that's part of the thinking I have. What I don't like, Garrett, is that they get exposed to things that they can't unsee. That's what's scary. So we need to have conversations with them about that too.
Yeah, and I think the best, and I agree with you when it comes to high school. I think because I have, you said three kids, I have five, and gosh, three of them are going to be in high school next year. So,
Yeah.
thinking about that a lot, and they have social media, but I think we've also put an importance on digital literacy, which I think you speak to. And the best way I think educators can do that at that high school age too is like play it out. Hey, here's a story of X, Y, or Z person went on the internet, posted, canceled. Whatever the story leads to, and it's never really good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can also show a path of this person's amazing at video games, created a business model out of it, started streaming video games, and now makes millions of dollars. Like that could also be there too to empower them to understand that, like you said, like this is a very powerful tool that we don't fully understand yet, but there are ways in which you can improve the world yourself, accomplish goals, leveraging these things because we're getting to a day and age where I think school is ever more irrelevant to the actual world we live in. And it becomes this cusp. Talk about hope. That's where I see the hope is we are on that cusp. We are in the place now where change can happen because teachers are flocking away. And I always think of like the macro of like pain equals growth. Like teachers are flocking away from the system. I think it's the time where we are feeling that pain in order for the new quote unquote way to rise. Because I think it has to these days, because you're going to have part of the reason why we have anxious kids is the way we structure school, period.
Yes, and we don't want kids hating and dreading school. I mean, we don't want that. Wouldn't it be neat if they actually looked forward to it? So there's lots of things around that too. And we've gone through progressive education. We've changed from traditional. Now it's time to do that major shift again. It's just time.
It's very much time. And I think people like you are leading the path in doing that and leading with granular tools. Again, I think people need frameworks. They need to see and feel the change for the change to happen. And so, talk to us a little bit before we get into the big question about the work you're doing currently, the consulting, the working, are you still in the classroom? That was one
Mhm.
question. And then if you're just working with educators to empower them, how's that going? And where can folks find you to get that done for themselves and to really learn the ways that we can really promote mental health in classrooms?
Yeah, there was a time where I was teaching and I was a therapist at the same time. And then I got called to speak more on this topic. People just wanted to hear the message that I was sending. And so I do a lot of keynotes, and that turned into a book that I co-authored with Dr. Cameron Caswell. She's an adolescent psychologist who we had some similar ideas, and I brought in the teacher perspective and the therapist
Love it.
perspective. Yeah, and it was like, we've got to insert these tools into everyday teaching practice. We just have to do it. And I also teach this to parents too, and so does Dr. Cam. So here's what I'm thinking is that when I work with education leaders, it really is about getting them to know that they can have hope. A lot of times there's a disconnect with them and their staff, but they are trying. They really are. And so, again, if you're right, the framework is super important. One of the things I'm working on right now with Joshua Stamper is we're writing a book that gives a framework about the language of behavior. How do we interpret behavior? How do we set up a space in the first place to prevent things from happening in the first place or reduce incidents? Because some people aren't ready to receive tools. They're not even in the right headspace for it. So we realize we've got to do that. We've got to get people realizing there is something we can do. We can all transform education individually, coming together. That's one of the frustrations teachers have with those cell phones is it's so inconsistent in my school. I'm giving up. I'm trying, but this other teacher isn't. So if we collectively come together and know that there's change that's needed, and then we do our individual parts, it's absolutely possible. So that's the work that I'm doing. I'm speaking about it. I'm doing
Love it.
workshops to actually teach the skills, and now I'm launching this new online course. There's different variations of it, but people want the skills, so I'm just offering it to them in different ways.
I love that. And that's the magic of technology these days is you
Yeah.
can scale experiences that you provide. Back in the day where I'm from, I'll just say back in the day, I won't even put an age on it, but you had to travel around the country exponentially to kind of get that message out. And I know that you do some of that work as well too, because it is important to kind of look someone in the eye, be present with someone and express these ideas and feelings. Because ultimately, I see, talking about tools, I see the shift in education and the need for the shift with tools kind of being met with cultural shift. And those two things together can be a really powerful, informant to change, which I definitely think needs to happen. And so kudos to you, Charlie, for the work that you're doing out there, the book. I know Josh Stamper, he's a good dude. Love that you're working with him to get this next book out and to really inform more frameworks and protocols for educators on the ground, leaders on the ground, because it always starts with leadership, right? Like great leaders will change the world, and we need to be empowering better leaders to focus a lot more on mental health. So um, we're going to go to the final question, which we get to at the end of the podcast. I always think of a great podcast as a drive home. So hoping your drive home is no longer than this. If it is, think about different employment, or if you're at a really good school that you love the kids, keep it driving. What I will say to you, based on your perspective in mental health, I'll ask you the question we ask everyone, which is, what is smart?
Smart is stopping to think about what the actual underlying problem is and how to solve it. And we all approach that in a very different way. And being able to rely on the strengths of other people to solve those problems and keep moving forward is what smart really is.
I really, really love that answer. The reason why is because I think you're talking about at a macro self-awareness. And self-awareness is to me a superpower, right? And not just like, hey, what am I good at? Because for me, school looks like a place where kids spend 12 years of their life focused on what they will love, what they're passionate about, and then finding how that can help people and then driving that purpose into their life. Like that's like fully what school looks like to me and nothing else. I'm the guy that thinks the report card should be, not all the grades up here, all the academics up here, but the academics in the little box that now says plays nicely and all of those social emotional things that they put down there. Um, I just think it's exponentially important for us to really consider and rethink, not just as parents out there that you work with, but as educators and leaders, that it's only going to change if we are willing to do the work. And one of the things we always remind our educators out there is like, yes, it's hard, but we do hard things. That's why we're educators. We're not, you know, in this job for money. We're in this job for heart. And talk about self awareness. Look in the mirror and ask yourself, does this bring me joy? Can I find joy in this career? And honestly, with that self awareness, Charlie, I would even say too, like, if you realize this isn't your gig, good. That's great for everyone. It's good for you to go find your purpose, and it's great for the learners that aren't getting the best education in the classroom. So, again, awesome answer. We would love our viewers and listeners to be able to go check your stuff out, Charlie. So, where can they find you on the interwebs?
If they just go to thrivingeducator.org, they'll find everything they need. And if they do nothing else, I want them to download this school mental health audit. If they're connected to a school, bring it there. It's a 15-page document. It's absolutely free. You just go to thrivingeducator.org/audit, or it'll pop up on the website. But it's a checklist, it's a tool for them to actually see what's going on. What are the strengths and deficits going on in their own building right now? And they can just simply look at it and have a conversation about it.
That's a great thing, and we'll link it down below in the description, both on podcast platforms and on YouTube. We'll also post the website when you called it out on the screen there for all of our listeners and viewers to be able to go check Charlie out. Charlie, thank you so much for your time today. It's so awesome to speak with you. We can't wait to have another conversation with you. We will be having a summit soon, where we're going to call some of the previous guests in. Would love your take, talking with some of the Avengers, as I had said off camera, of education, and really trying to start informing what that package looks like for the future. So thank you so much for joining us. And for What is Smart, I'm Garrett. We're going to bring you more amazing guests for you to listen to watch, to really get an inside view on what intelligence looks like in the 21st century. We will see you on the next episode of What is Smart. Bye, everyone.